Honestly, it's a nice problem to have that there are two gorgeous, amazing men both in love with you and you have to pick one. Like, boo-hoo. Hey, what's up you guys? It's Avery and welcome back to my channel. For those of you who've never been here before, what's good? Glad you're here. Glad you made it. How's your day been? So today's video is going to be a short little January wrap-up. And I'm going to talk about all the books that I read this month. I only read 5 books this month, which is normally pretty good for me, but my goal for the year is 70, which is, wait, what's 5 times 12? So I'm behind. I need to read 6 books a month in order to hit 70 this year. Yeah, I need to read 6 books every month, so I'm a little behind with 5 this month, but that is because one of these books I read was gigantic and it took me forever to get through. So even though I'm 1 book behind this month, I know I'll be able to catch up eventually. 2 of the 5 were 5-star reads, which is always super exciting. Without further ado, let's just jump into it and talk about what I read this month. The first book that I read in January, and I guess the year, was Before Your Memory Fades by Toshikazu Kawaguchi. This is the 3rd book in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series, which I talk about on my channel all the time because I'm a really big fan of the series, and this is the 3rd book, which came out in November, I think, of last year, which I was just super excited to read because I love the first 2. These books are set in Tokyo in this cafe that's kind of hidden in this back alley. It is a cafe that allows patrons the chance to travel back in time. But there are a lot of rules set up for the people who are traveling back in time. One of the rules is that you can only stay in the past as long as it takes before your coffee gets cold. Also, everything that you do in the past or say in the past will not change the future or the present. So nothing that you do when you go to the past is actually going to change the way anything turns out in your current life, which makes it kind of hard for the people who want to go back, because what's the point of going back if you're not going to be able to change anything? There are 4 chapters in each book, and each chapter follows a different person and why they want to go back in time, who they want to see. But there are also reoccurring characters from the cafe, the people who work the cafe and their families, and so they're also part of the story, which is really fun. And this one was interesting because this one is not set in Tokyo. This one is set in another city. Hokkaido is the name. So there's another cafe run by the same family in Hokkaido, which is not Tokyo, a different part of Japan. But I love these books. I think that they are so simple and so heartwarming, really touching, and they really make you think about, you know, what you would say to people that you no longer have in your life. And even though what they go back in time to do doesn't change their present, it changes who they are, and so it helps them live the rest of their life usually in a more fulfilling way. And these books are just super simple, super heartwarming, great stories. I give it 5 stars. The next book I read in January is actually a play, and it is A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. Here we've got Mr. Marlon Brando shirtless on the cover, so it looks like you're just reading like a hardcore romance book, which is fun. This is a play about 2 women that are sisters named Blanche and Stella is married to a man named Stanley, and Blanche comes to stay with Stella and Stanley down in New Orleans, and Blanche is a really interesting character. She's kind of neurotic and she's very judgmental of their lifestyle, and her and Stanley butt heads all the time, and you kind of are trying to figure out what's going on with Blanche. You know something has obviously happened to make her a little neurotic in the way that she is, but you don't know what it is, as well as you're dealing with the relationship between Stella and Stanley, which is a pretty unhealthy marriage with some abuse in it. And it's overall just like a story about the bond between the sisters, and it's also definitely about mental health and how that was treated back in the 50s, I think is when this takes place. Actually, I think it's the 40s. It's also a Pulitzer Prize winning play, which I didn't realize until just now looking at that. But it also deals with homophobia and homosexuality in the 40s, and in a really very kind of tragic way. But overall, I really liked it. I thought that it was a really good depictor of these relationships between the characters, and I enjoy reading plays a lot because it's like just reading dialogue after dialogue after dialogue, and you're not having to read descriptive paragraphs, because sometimes, let's be honest, that can get a little old. But I really enjoyed this play. I thought it was really good. I thought it was very moving and also a little tragic. The next book I read was kind of weird, kind of fun, and it is The Arts of Beauty or Secrets of a Lady's Toilet by Madame Lola Montez. I got this book recently at a used bookstore and it caught my eye because it's super cute, like the cover is. But this is a compilation of essays from this woman, Lola Montez, who is a countess, and she kind of had a crazy life. She started as a dancer, and then she got married and became a countess eventually. She was friends with Walt Whitman. She moved all over the world, and she was kind of like an it girl of like the 1840s. So this is a book about beauty standards in that time period, and it's really funny because she's very witty in the way she talks about men and women is really funny. A lot of it is very outdated. It's also very much about like thin white beauty, which, you know, is a small fraction of the world. She does mention beauty from other parts of the world, and she has different recipes for different skincare routines, and she'll have things from Asia or from just all over different parts of the world. Even though a lot of it is super just outdated and you just are kind of laughing at the way that people used to view beauty standards, there were a few things in here that I thought did stand the test of time a little bit. But in the back of the book, there's also another funny little essay called With Hints to Gentlemen on the Art of Fascinating, which is a completely sarcastic advice section that she gives to men on how to win women over, and it's so funny. It had me cackling. I'm just gonna read some of the things she says because it's hilarious. She just lists 50 rules for men when they're trying to impress a woman. One of them is, should you invite a lady out to supper, you must by all means order 3 times as much expensive dishes as it will be possible for you to eat, as this will show her that you have a generous disregard of money and would just as soon waste it as spend it economically, which will convince her that your wife will never want for money. It will be greatly to your advantage to entertain the lady you would win with an account of the number of women who are in love with you and of the decided advances which they have made to you, for this will not only prove that you are a great favorite with the ladies and a man of true honor, but it will convince her that she may have the honor of being enrolled in the same list. It's so funny. It's just her literally giving the worst advice to men on what they should do, and obviously some of it is specific to the 19th century, but also I was reading this and I was like, men really have not changed. And I thought this was just a fun little book, and it was interesting to read about beauty and courting in the 19th century. And the fact that women have always thought the same exact way of all men throughout the course of human history. The 4th book that I read this month, and the reason why I probably didn't hit my 6 books this month, is because I read Babel by R.F. Kuang, and this book is gigantic. I read it on my Kindle, which I think makes it feel longer than it is because you have no sense of how far you're through it. You have a percentage number at the bottom, but you don't have the physical feel of the book to like really be able to feel how much you're going through and how much you have left. But this book was so long. I know about myself that I do not do well with long books, but I still really wanted to read this because it's been so hyped up. I mean, everyone has heard about it, everyone loves it, and so I was like, I have to read it. This book is set during the British Empire, and it follows a young man named Robin who is Chinese. His entire family dies because of this influenza that is happening in China, and he gets mysteriously whisked away to England by this professor at Oxford to learn and study languages, because in this world, so this world is based on the history of the British Empire, but it's also magical realism. So in this world, the power of translation, of translating one word or phrase from one language to another, contains magic within it, and there are these scholars that are able to harness the power of the translated words in order to make magic, which they can sell to people and which powers the empire and which powers like the entire world basically. And so at Oxford University there is this big tower called Babel, which is the Institute of Translation. It's this most prestigious translation institute in the world, and it's a really big deal because the translation that happens there is what powers like the entire country and the world, and the magic they do there is so important to trade and the empire. Robin is whisked away to England as a boy to learn these languages so that he can eventually go to Oxford and study. And so the book follows him as he goes to Oxford eventually, and his group of friends that he meets there in the same year as him, and kind of the implications of colonialism and how he deals with being taken away from his homeland. And when he eventually comes to realize that maybe the empire and this country that has given him a home is also the problem, and he doesn't want to be complicit. This is really like the epitome of a dark academia book. We have secret societies, we have murder, we have studying, we have just pretty much everything you would ever want in a dark academia book. And I really, really enjoyed the setting of the book because it takes place in Oxford, which I studied abroad in Oxford and loved it. So I really enjoyed reading it for that reason. It was a really good setting for the book. And the book started out really strong for me. I got like 25% of the way through the book really quickly, but my one qualm with the book was just how long it was. I feel like there were some passages that were just so dense for no reason, as well as the footnotes in the book. Those were just also, sometimes they seemed a little unnecessary. They kind of slowed the reading time down a little bit, and it's like such a shame because I really enjoyed the book. The way she tackled colonization and just so many other really, really important themes in the book, like racism, misogyny, were so important, and the way she did them was so good, and I just loved the entire concept of the book. Was so cool. But it was just a little too long that by the end I was just ready for it to be over. But overall, I thought that it was a really good book. I like really understand why it was super popular, but I do wish it was just a little shorter because it just dragged on in some spots a lot. Really want to read more from R.F. Kuang because like this book was, the ideas were so good, and I know that she's so smart. So I really want to read something else from her, just maybe something that isn't as thick as my head. So I have a few other things from her on my TBR, but I really enjoyed the book. So I would suggest it to people, but also like you really have to be prepared to like buckle in for it because it's thick and dense. It takes a little while to get through, but overall I think that it's worth it, I would say. Okay, and the last book that I read this month was One True Loves by Taylor Jenkins Reid. Y'all, I was obsessed with this book. I read it in a little over 24 hours. From the get-go, I was sucked in, and it just like completely took over like the 24 hours between when I started it and when I finished it. This book follows a girl named Emma, and she meets the love of her life when she is in high school, and they get married when they're 25, and they just have this really fun life together of traveling the world. The day before their 1-year anniversary, he gets on a helicopter up in Alaska, and the helicopter goes down, and everyone on board is pronounced dead. Even though they never find his body, he's pronounced dead. Emma's world is basically shattered. This is the love of her life. She just can't imagine herself loving anyone the way that she loves him, and she is obviously just reeling and grieving for years. And the book follows her grieving process. She moves back home, and she starts the healing process. After 2 years, decides she needs to move on in order to be happy. Then enters another man, who is another man from her past, from her childhood, and they eventually fall in love and get engaged. 3.5 years since her husband went missing and was pronounced dead, and guess who shows up? Guess who turns up in the middle of the ocean? Let's take a guess. Her husband. So boom, her husband shows up. She's literally feels like her world is turned upside down because it's her husband, the love of her life, but who she has literally thought has been dead. So she has grieved him and fully moved on and is fully in love with her new fiance. It's me editing. Want you guys to know that none of this is spoilers. All of this is on the back of the book, and I've literally just taken forever to talk about it because I really want to explain like the angst, but none of this is spoilers. Like, this is all written on the back of the book. You know that all this is gonna happen, so don't worry. This book is so good because you feel so bad for all three of the characters. You feel so bad for her husband, who's literally thinking only of her for 3.5 years as he's survived out in the middle of the ocean. And then you feel so horrible for Emma because what? That doesn't happen to people. She has no idea what she wants to do because she knows she loves her fiance, but she sees her husband and she's like, oh, hey, love him too. And then you feel horrible for her fiance because her fiance's like, what the hell? Imagine you fall in love with somebody who's a widow and you guys get engaged and then boom, her husband shows back up from the dead and you're like, cool. What do I do with that information? I was just so hooked. I was enthralled. I was with Emma the whole time. I was like, what are we gonna do? What is she gonna do? Who's she gonna pick? Who does she love more? Romance is not usually my cup of tea, but this book, ooh, I was sipping the tea. And I really enjoyed the ending. I thought that it wrapped up very well. I was so worried for like the whole time. I was like, how is this gonna end without us all just being heartbroken? But it ended really well and it was very good. 5 stars from me. It sounds kind of cheesy. Like, I know that the premise sounds cheesy, but even though it is, I thought it was really interesting to read it and put yourself in that position and like try to imagine that happening, because even though it sounds so outlandish, things like that have happened before. People have gone into comas and they thought that they were never going to wake up again, and then 10 years later they wake up and their spouse has moved on. Or people do go missing for however many years and then they come back and their spouse has moved on and you're like, what on earth do you do in that situation? So those are the 5 books that I read in January. I really had a good reading month this month. What was your favorite book that you read this month? Let me know if you've read any of the books I talked about today and what your thoughts on them are. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe if you want to see more videos from me in the future. Thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video.